Welcome to Elevision. Today we're in South San Francisco at a biotech firm called Centivax, where their mission centers around reaching universal immunity. Dr. Jake Glanville, so excited to finally meet with you here at your hub, Centivax in South San Francisco. We actually first met many years ago, eerily, as the docuseries from Netflix, Pandemic: How to Prevent an Outbreak, came out as the entire world basically froze because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But you've been working on a lot since then. How have you been?
I've been staying busy. It's good to see you through these interesting times.
Yeah, and so since then, there are two things that I want to talk about. The universal flu vaccine that you all are working on, as well as the snake anti-venom. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're working on and why exactly those two projects that stand out?
Sure. So the big picture of what I work on is universal immunity. And both of these programs, the universal flu shot as well as the universal anti-venom, they're really using the same kind of common biology. And that is, rather than an anti-venom that works on one snake or a flu shot that works on one strain of virus, we get the medicines to allow your immune system to target the shared parts that are in common across the whole host of 650 snakes globally, or all the possible influenza viruses. And the other thing that they have in common is that they represent the ability to use a new class of biology, this broad spectrum biology, to create new 21st century medicines for like very large problems that affect billions of people.
And so what's really exciting is that you're actually at a phase where you're testing this on people. Tell me a little bit more about that. Who are you selecting and how's it going?
Sure. So I've been working on this for 13 years. And a couple weeks ago, I'm just getting back from this very surreal experience where I was able to go down to our clinical site in Melbourne and stand about 15 feet away and silently watch while the vaccine had been developed was being administered to human clinical trial patients. So we're running a large study right now, 180 subjects spanning 18 years to 64 and then 65 to quite old, exploring 4 different doses. And then, we're looking at how well they tolerate it, but the critical thing is we're also able to take their blood and then test their antibodies from their blood against a very large panel of 24 viruses that represent old pandemics, new circulating strains, the guidance to be able to demonstrate would they have been protected if they were exposed. And so we get a lot out of this very large study. It's a really exciting and very gratifying time. In some ways, it feels like you're stepping into a deja vu of your own creation. And you get to celebrate for a bit, but very quickly we're like, okay, what's next? Like, we plan for the phase 2, we plan for scale up, plan for commercialization. And so we're meeting again at a very exciting period in the company.
So there's still a lot of work ahead, but I mean, to see something come to this point after 13 years of putting in work, I can't imagine how surreal it must be, especially it's such a game changer to see it administered to people.
Yeah, no, it's what we always envision. It's exciting, but it's also bizarre how quickly your brain adapts, and you like finally reach that point you'd always imagine, and like you're excited, there's the champagne, there's the tears, and then you're like, okay, what's next? And so that's kind of where we're at. We're all hunkered down. And I'll just say, like, I've been working on this for 13 years, but we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for like a phenomenal team that started increasingly gathering around, because it's a big problem and a big opportunity to make the world better. If we can make a broad spectrum flu vaccine, first off, people could get a shot and they don't get sick, right? That's the whole problem with flu shots, is like people say, oh, I took a flu shot and I still got sick. And that's
been my experience as well, and it's kind of where every year I revisit that question, do I really want to get the flu shot, because am I just going to experience the symptoms anyway, or is it really going to work this time around? So this is kind of the solution to that issue? Yeah,
so I take the flu shots every year because I'm an asthmatic, and other people get sick and recover, and then I get pneumonia. But it's like, I take it, this last year, it sucked, right? The current vaccine is like 25% effective. The one before, the previous year, was about 30%. So it's less than 1 in 3 people who take it are going to receive the benefit they're expecting. And I work in this field and I want better. Like, that is a really hard thing to explain to the average person, like, around the world, where they just expect, and I think that's honestly the contract that is reasonable to ask for between society and vaccinology is like, I want a shot and I just want to not get sick afterwards. I want it to be like a tetanus shot or a shingles shot or a MMRV shot. And so that's what we're building, is a single vaccine that works against all the strains of flu. And first it does that. You take it and you go, okay, now I don't have to worry about the flu. Second, you don't have to take it right before flu season starts, because you're no longer having to make a new vaccine every year and they're rushing to barely get it in time. And there's a lot of people that just got busy and they're like, I don't know if it's worth taking anymore. Now you can take it at any point during the year. But then the more profound thing it does is that once you have a shot that the virus can't get around anymore, what you end up getting is less flu globally, and we could begin to contemplate eradicating flu from the earth and create a post-flu world where there's, first off, no more flu pandemics ever. There have been 5 in the last century. You no longer have pandemics if you have a broad-spectrum vaccine. So the pandemic era is over, and it becomes then impossible to contemplate, okay, what if we just do what they did with smallpox, which is wipe one of our ancient enemies forever off the earth to give a gift to every future generation of society. And so that's what we're working on.
I can't imagine what it must feel like to be working on something so profound.
Well, it's, you know, it's kind of like my grandfather worked on the man-moon missions. And I think they had a harder job because no one had ever done it before. And they were able to succeed anyway because of the foundation, the math, that all looked good. And so it didn't matter all the people told them, oh, it's not possible, because the fundamentals were strong. And we have that here, but our job is easier because they already did this. In 1980, they announced the eradication of smallpox, which had killed like 25% of many, many generations since the dawn of man. And then people with like pocket protectors and like none of the advanced technology we have now were able to wipe out one of our most ancient enemies from the earth within like 150 years of the invention of vaccines. And that's amazing. And so they've already done for us the job of showing it can be done. And we now are living in a period where we're in a golden age of biotechnology where nobody's had the tools that we have. I feel it's like our duty to be able to continue that job that Edward Jenner started 230 years ago.
What is the frontier of tech that you guys are using in order to approach this issue?
So there's a number of tools. I just had like good luck and good timing that I got interested in immunology right around the time that there were these kind of arms races for the bigger, faster, smaller, faster, cheaper genome sequencer. And that was from the effort to sequence the human genome. And the human genome has like 26,000 genes. I had access to one of these instruments that now fit on a bench. Before they were in a factory, even 10 years before, and now you have a device on a bench that could sequence the genome. And I was able to ask, well, okay, the genome it's been done. What about the immune system? The immune system has the ability to produce hundreds of millions of unique antibodies. It's way, way bigger and more diverse than your genome. Can we deep sequence that? And the reason I wanted to do that was there are these bizarre mysteries on why the immune system starts attacking yourself and producing autoimmunity. Why is it that there are these little parts like the Achilles heels on flu that never change, and yet the immune system stubbornly seems like it fails to recognize those sites? And it was sort of impossible to dig in, lift open the hood and look at the engine and try to understand why the immune system was failing until these tools became available. And so I just happened to be the generation that had first access to deep sequencing the immune system, these laser-based, high-throughput cell interrogation technologies, this fancy, delightful treasure chest of the bounty of the golden age of biotech. And so we utilize a lot of those. We do single-cell sequencing. We use computational immunology. We took advantage of the advancements in the mRNA technology that happened because of the pandemic. And
which then you were working on COVID antibodies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so during the pandemic, I was working on the universal flu concept since 2012, and then the pandemic hit, and we were still advancing the flu work, but at the time we were testing it on pigs and ferrets, and still more work was required. And so we were able to use the same toolkit to go after broad spectrum coronavirus antibodies, and we're also advancing the anti-venom and some of their programs in parallel. Now, not every program works. So in the case of the coronavirus, we made those antibodies. They were looking good, but then this Omicron massive change happened to the virus, and our antibodies, like many other antibodies, didn't cross effectively. So I pulled the plug on that project, and we kept focusing on the flu work.
And so why should the average person get excited about this?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. First, there's flu shots. That you can get a universal flu shot means no more flu pandemics. And I think that resonates now because everyone just is emerging from a pandemic, and I think everyone's pretty tired of them. And Pandemics are annoying because they happen just slow enough that they fall outside of normal human attention span. And luckily, we just had, luckily, unluckily, everyone's had the attention because they just went through one. But they actually happen pretty fast, pretty frequently. There's been 20 flu pandemics in the last 100 years. One of them killed 50 million people. And so it would be nice to be able to just make it so there's no longer a flu pandemic era. That's over forever for humanity.
And still, I think the World Health Organization reports up to 650,000 people die every year still from the flu.
A lot of people die. You have a lot of sickness. Even if you're not dying, there's long-term, they call it sequelae. It means that it's not just you're infected and you get better and you're fine. There are lasting damages, similar to the notorious long COVID. There are similar things that can happen with flu. There's also things like if a pregnant mother gets infected with flu, her child by the time they're 20 is 7 times more likely to get schizophrenia. So there are these long-term consequences. These viruses are not our friends. So those are big picture reasons. There's also the real practical thing, which is, I can take a flu shot and I know I won't get sick. That's easy and one less thing to worry about in our complicated lives. And then the other reason to get excited is the consequences of the platform. So flu is the first thing I went after, but our immune focusing technology is very broadly applicable. So we're already working on a follow-on program to target the whole class of the herpes viruses. And that's things like shingles, that's EBV mono, CMV, HSV1 and 2, that's oral and genital herpes. And then there's some other viruses that you've never heard of before called HHV6 and 7, but they all belong to the herpes virus class. And the reason to target them, the primary reason is actually not to prevent you from getting those viruses. The real reason you want to target them is that last year they found the shingles vaccine to treat zoster, which is another herpes virus. The people who received the shingles vaccine had 23 to 30% less chance of getting Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And less neurodegeneration. And even if they had neurodegeneration, they had a slower rate of decay. They also had less cardiovascular heart disease. And that was...
I would have thought that could be even linked.
Yeah.
It could help something so, you would think so different, but I guess it's all connected to the same system.
So I've been watching this for 15 years, and I was suspecting this, and there were these... The problem is in the Alzheimer's field, for a long time, all the oxygen was sucked out of the room by this thing called the amyloid hypothesis, which people thought these certain plaques were driving the disease.
Is that not the case? I'm still under the impression that
Most of those drugs,
old news.
Those drugs have mostly failed. There is some, it seems like it helps a little bit, but I think there's one antibody now. It seems like it has a little bit of a benefit, but it turns out just wiping out the plaques doesn't solve the problem, that the plaques might be a consequence of a deeper problem. And meanwhile, I was originally at a Pfizer site just right over there called We're Not Neuroscience.
South San Francisco, it's where the magic happens.
My entire career has basically moved around places that I could practically shoot a catapult at from here. And so they were working on the problem, and I was always interested in the infectious disease hypothesis. And the reason I was interested in it was that there were these studies in places in the world where they have national health systems where they found out that people who would take acyclovir, or valacyclovir, the herpes medicines for oral or genital herpes, they ended up having about a 50% drop in Alzheimer's later in life, and neurodegeneration was also dropped. And so I found that really fascinating, and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because all the herpes viruses, they live in neurons or they live in cells that can get in your brain, and chickenpox, for instance, climbs up into the basal ganglion, a part of nerves right near your, and they find it in your brain. HHV6 and 7 are in your brain. If they don't live in nerves, they live in these other cells, like glial cells that live in your brain. And so they infect you your whole life long, and they silently reactivate over and over again.
So many people are affected by this.
Yeah, so you and I have 4 herpes viruses in us right now, at least. Everybody has EBV, mono, chickenpox, super common, CMV, super common, HHV6 and 7, we probably both have, and we just don't know about it. And these things are sitting around, and they reactivate over and over again. And
it's like a lifelong curse.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, yeah, no shit. Excuse my French. So, obviously, if you have a viral infection on an organ and it's reactivating over and over again, that's bad for the organ. If I look back through history, people used to call this disease consumption. It was this disease of the beautiful, where people would have trouble breathing and they get pink cheeks, and everyone was like, oh, and they kind of glamorized it until they realized it was actually tuberculosis. And It was like, oh, no, okay, you have a pathogen in your lungs, and that's why you have lung problems. Similarly, we have liver diseases caused by viruses. And so it stands to reason if you have a chronic viral infection in your brain and your neurons that could be contributing to an organ failure, which is what Alzheimer's and dementia is. So I was kind of watching this and expecting it. And when we saw the shingles result, it wasn't surprising to me, except that it caused me to think, we have a universal immunity platform. If we can get 23 to 30% protection just against chickenpox, right, shingles, imagine what we could get if we could target all 8 of the herpes viruses.
How frustrated do you get when you see people's apprehension to vaccines?
I try with this organization, and I think that in a larger way, the entire medical establishment needs to, first off, make the best possible medicines they can, but then they just need to be forthright about here's what we know, here's what we don't, here's the benefits, but here's the limitations.
We're not gods after all.
Yeah, we can make things better. So I don't know. So I actually don't mind. People people squeeze tomatoes before they buy them in a store. I think it's okay to ask some questions, and I think we need to be able to give answers.
And so shifting over now to the snake portion of this interview, which I'm really curious as to why you even wanted to take something on like creating a universal anti-venom. I understand that it does affect so many people around the world, but when you take a look at where it happens most, that's not necessarily where the money is.
Yeah.
And you don't tend to see a company like this in a place like this take on a project like that unless there's going to be a major return. So why did you do this, and what's your thought process around it?
So there's 2 parts to that answer, and one is, what do I see as 3 parts. What do I see as our mission? How do I see us building towards that mission, and where strategic levers can occur? And then third, working backwards from success, how do I get there? And I need all of those 3 to line up to do something. But the mission is the easiest part. I think that we have the opportunity to create absolute breakthrough medicines that could transform hundreds of millions of people's lives. And like, what better use of my time could I spend than that? When I sold my first company, which was like on December 31st of 2020 during a pandemic, of course I would have liked to go and just be on a beach. And the reason I didn't do that is that the universal vaccine technology was working. I was seeing this amazing results in pigs and ferrets. And I looked at it, and I'm proud of what I did in my last company, but honestly, like, all that work, something else is going to come along and replace it within 30 years, right? Where my legacy would die before I did, versus like, I looked at this and like, you have to be realistic. Like, not everything you work on is going to work, and you have to accept that. But I was like, if we're successful here, this is by far the single greatest contribution I can do in my life to the future of humanity. Like, this is an opportunity to reach up and touch the long arc of history and lift things up for the future. And so that's the organizing principle of the projects that we work on, and the priority therefore naturally lends itself to the anti-venom problem. It's a huge problem. First off, as you know, I grew up in Guatemala in a Mayan village. We have bites around the village, mostly up in the Petén. But I'm interested in neglected tropical diseases. And this one, it's, 5 million people get bit every year. There's 140,000 deaths, and then 300 to 400,000 people lose a limb. And that sucks if you're in a developing world. Like, if you're in a family where suddenly you cannot work and support the rest of your family, you become a burden on a group which is already struggling.
It's harder to get around even, like super basic, even just that in places like this.
And so I was interested in the problem for that reason, because it was, there's a bunch of companies that we could look at right now that are working on cancer drugs where you can charge, each patient might get charged a couple $100,000, and there's maybe 20,000 patients a year, right? Where this, you're talking about 5 million people a year that would benefit. So the scale of benefit was huge. That was one part. But in order to get there, 2 other parts also had to be satisfied. The second part was, okay, there needs to be a way for this to be sufficiently profitable to work on, because
it's a business at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, I also just think
you need fundraising to happen. So.
I think if you can make, that's the power of capitalism, is if you can close the circuit of action to profit to action, it becomes this self-fulfilling machine that just keeps grinding away. And so I needed to make it profitable enough that it would continue into the future. Otherwise, it's just an idea and it would evaporate. And it turns out there's a way to solve for this. So, I kind of solving the economic side was almost as interesting as solving the bioengineering side.
And that's why you're CEO, not just in the lab.
So so here's the cool part. So right now, it's true. So the people who most need these medicines are living in the developing world. And honestly, it's not like they have no money. I think that's honestly insulting how people describe that. But like, someone in my village can pay money for medicine. They just can't pay like $8,000 for a treatment. Like, that's an unreasonable hardship. But the anti-venoms, you can get them down to $100 or ideally $50 a dose, and that's something people absolutely could pay for a life-saving medicine. So how do you make a business out of that? Well, what you do first off,
I just can't get past that figure. $50 to save a life.
yeah, that's what we're talking about, right?
Wow.
You first off go, okay, what's the scope of the market? And the whole problem of why it's a neglected tropical disease is that it's about a $500 million market, but it's fractured across 35 different products because there's 650 different venomous snakes all over the world, and an anti-venom works against a single or maybe a couple snakes. And so let me just walk you through the experience of you're a farmer in a village, and you go, oh shit, I just got bit by a snake. And they go, okay, so they take a while to go bring you in somewhere, and then the doctor's like, oh, I'm sorry. Were you bit by a horribly scary venomous snake? Oh, did you happen to have the presence of mind to go rustle through the grass and grab the snake and bring it in so we can look at it and see if we happen to have the anti-venom that could treat that, if it even exists? Because if not, we don't want to give you one of these anti-venoms because what they're made out of is horse serum, and it's going to make it even worse. If it's not going to help you, we don't want to administer it. And so that whole situation sucks.
That's a gamble.
Yeah. And look, anti-venom has saved a lot of lives in the last 130-ish years, but it's not perfect. And so the market is fractured, and that's part of the problem, is you take mostly developing world market and you fractured it, and that suddenly becomes very economically unattractive. But if you have a single universal product, then you've suddenly reunited that global market. So now you're talking about $500 million a year.
You're not having to guess what kind of a snake just bit me.
Yeah, and so people can administer it more often. It solves, and it's also fully human antibodies, and we'll talk about how we got those in a second. And
one brave soul.
So it's very tolerable, and unlike the horse serum that you get an allergic reaction to called serum sickness, you can administer this stuff much safer and therefore with less medical support. And so that unfractures the market. Then you go, okay, who's actually going to pay enough to justify working on this? And how do I get investors and grants and stuff? How can I make a business that actually becomes a self-fulfilling engine? And so it turns out, yeah, the majority of people who need it, you're going to have to produce it at COGS. But there are these other two tiers, or really three tiers, where you can make a substantial profit. And the first one is that about 25 of the world's largest national militaries absolutely want a universal antivenom product, and they need it to be able to protect their warfighters, and they're willing to pay very handsomely for that product, because right now they have this problem where they have the same problem that the villager does. Like, everyone's equal and you get bit by a snake. And so you can sell it at a premium, and they will maintain annual supply. And so and basically anywhere where warfighters could get bit by a snake, or they might deploy them somewhere where they get bit by a snake, including the United States warfighting machinery, they would want universal antivenom.
So then you're creating this mass supply to have available.
Well, they pay for it at a premium, which aids you in subsidizing the scaled manufacture. And then your second tier is there are about 28,600 medical systems in the developed world that will pay the developed world prices for the antivenom.
So do tell, how did you get started on this project? Who's helping?
Yeah, so we got a little help here, and that is, I was interested in it. In 2017, the World Health Organization had just declared this a neglected tropical disease, right after I think Sanofi discontinued a key product in Africa because of the cost problems. And so I was like, all right, let me look around. I got interested, and I was like, wait a second. Like, yeah, there's all these snakes, but maybe it's kind of like my flu work. Maybe nature's lazy, and all the 650 snakes probably use the same set of toxins. And if that's true, maybe they, just like flu, have some little part that they can't change, like an Achilles heel, and then then I don't need 650 antivenoms. I just need one antivenom made of the antibodies that target the Achilles heels, and it would be a universal antivenom. So I did some bioinformatics on my computer, and I looked at it, and I'm like, yeah, it actually looks like those spots exist. And then I was like, okay, now I need to get some antibodies. And I did not want to get horse antibodies, because they have all these side effects.
Right.
I'm like, if you're going to build this, build it with human antibodies that are super well tolerated. That was the work I did at Pfizer. That was the work my previous company, Distributed Bio, did. So I'm a big fish, small pond, but global expert at human antibody engineering. And so I was fishing around. Originally, I was trying to find someone who, a clumsy snake researcher who'd been bit a couple times, so I could start analyzing their blood, because each time you get bit, it's kind of like being immunized with the venom. And instead, I found these news articles about this guy named Tim Friede. And Tim Friede, for nearly 18 years, decided to dedicate his life to injecting himself starting with very tiny doses, survivable doses, and then slowly escalating the doses of cobra venom, taipan venom, black mamba venom, crate venom, western diamondback rattler venom, like 16 species of the world's most deadly snakes. And so I was reading about it, and he would increase the doses, starting with tiny bits up to the amount that a snake would deliver, and then he would let these snakes that would kill a horse bite him, and he'd survive it.
He would just do this on his own. How did he even understand the dose?
So so the interesting thing about Tim Friede is that he's both wild in his ambitions to do something this crazy, but also incredibly methodical on his execution. And
which is what it takes to do something like this.
And so he's an autodidact, but he has like his knowledge of like every little protein involved in like the coagulation cascade exceeds mine. He's dedicated his life to this across the herpetology, the snake study, but also the molecular biology and the immunology. Like the guy's astonishingly well read in this area because he loves this so much. And so I read about this guy, and I immediately looked at it and I was like, there's a diamond in the rough, because he had 654 self-immunizations and 202 bites, and he kept rotating between the snake species. And so I was like, if anybody has coaxed their immune system through constant exposure and changing the snake species to learn to recognize the part that they all have in common, it's this guy.
Wow.
And so I reached out and I managed to get in touch with him through reporters eventually that done stories on him. And I had this call in 2017, and March 16th, I think it was. And I called him up and I'm like, hi, look, I saw this stuff, and I know this might be an awkward question, but I would love to get my hands on your blood. Yeah, and you never know that's not the first time I'll say I've told someone that.
Not the most casual conversation for over the phone with a stranger.
Immunology makes you a bit of a vampire. Like I get pretty excited when I meet identical twins because you always want their blood. Yeah, I'm kind of like a modern vampire, but no, he was not surprised at all. So his response to me was like, yeah, I've been waiting for this call for a long time, because the reason he'd done it because he wanted to get studied. He wanted to prove he could create universal snake immunity, and then he wanted to get studied so that people could make a medicine out of what he'd done.
It's fascinating how dedicated this person is to just doing this on his own in his basement at home, is what I read. Oh my gosh. And I think it's so cool to meet someone like you, that you're living at the right time, you're in the right place, and you're meeting the right people to make what you want happen with the technology that exists today. Yeah. Are you utilizing AI in any particular way?
For a while, I was grouchy old man about AI because I thought it was way overhyped in certain areas. Certain areas, undeniably, it's super useful, but there was a wave of people saying, oh, this is going to replace antibody discovery. And I was just like, I just don't think the technology is there, because people thought they had this amazing success on what's called the folding problem. Take a sequence and predict how it was going to fold with something called AlphaFold. And that worked because for the last 40 years, scientists all over the world have been collecting examples of a sequence and then what it folded into. And so they had this database of millions of examples and then hundreds of millions of sequence examples. So they were able to feed this massive amount of data into an AI, and it was able to solve this big open unsolved problem, which is undeniably amazing. But it gave rise to people like mistaken beliefs that AI was immediately going to solve all these other biotech problems. And the missing link was that they're like, oh, it's going to solve antibody discovery. And I'm like, no, unlike the folding problem, there is no database of hundreds of millions of antibodies binding to things. Like, that database doesn't exist. You don't have the training data. AI requires massive training data to create generalized interpretation. And so sure enough, companies that claimed that they could do that they actually got some articles came out and showed
that was snake oil.
Yeah. And like they're making progress there, but it's going to be a slower slog than people were anticipating by a lot. And so I originally was skeptical of some of the hype. There are a couple places in my organization where we do use AI. One of them is for vaccine design. There is a generalizable property of proteins that I think you can get a huge database where we have for, and that is the proteins have a thermostability property, how high you can heat them before they fall apart. And it turns out that's something that there's these massive databases for. In fact, there's whole organisms that live at like hot temperatures and stuff.
I was going to say, judging by your freezers, it's probably not that warm, but no, apparently they can survive in heat.
Yeah. And so you can get collections of millions of sequences that have been adapted for heat versus cold, and you can use those to inform an AI that can look at any protein and recommend changes to make it more stable. And that is a super useful thing to do because, and that's something we do at this company, where we take, when you're designing vaccines, you often want to stabilize the viral proteins to make them more susceptible, basically stop them from flipping and changing shape, and trap them in the configuration that renders them most susceptible to the immune system attacking them. And so that is a good application. And then the other applications are just more routine use of the chatting algorithms to be able to go, I would say, do deep mining into lots of literature. I think that's super useful. And
saves you time at the library.
yeah, this is, I mean, you got to double check it. It's kind of like a little bit like a sociopath. It'll tell you very confidently whether or not, it doesn't have like a degree of confidence like a human can sometimes. So like, it's like that person who just goes, yeah, it's definitely the case, and speaks with authority with like no relationship on the authority of their voice to the confidence in their answer. And that's annoying. But it certainly lets you ask kinds of questions that are better than what you can get out of like a Google search. And so we use it for that purpose also.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, very exciting stuff. What's the next step in both the universal flu vaccine and now this anti-venom? Sure.
Well, with flu, I think next week we're going to have 180 people enrolled in the phase 1A study. So at that point, there's already serum being shipped out to the analysis sites. We're like in mid-clinical for phase 1A. The data is being collected. It's going to be analyzed against this large panel of 24 viruses that include pandemic strains and circulating strains, the things that actually get people sick, the old historical and guidance strains. And so we're going to analyze that using this special test that was built for flu. Because flu vaccines have to be made twice a year every year, they have a quick test where I could take your blood, no offense, and I could test it against the virus to see whether you would have been protected if you were exposed to it. And so we're going to do that against 24 viruses, against this 180 subjects. And so we get what's called efficacy, like a demonstration of protective breadth on all the subjects. And we get that by a little after the 4th of July. After that, our clinical committee meets, reviews, and then our plan is to kick off the phase 1B studies. And we're looking at US and UK sites for the phase 1B studies. And that's another 120 subjects where it's called an expansion study. You're adding more subjects into the chosen doses that we think are the right doses for the ultimate vaccine. In parallel, we're getting up for next year phase 2 studies, which would be global, northern and southern hemisphere. We're starting to do something called scalable manufacturing, which is we're taking the manufacturing process and now we're adapting it so that we could go forward with a process that could be scaled up to produce hundreds of millions of doses easily. And so, yeah, it's exciting times for the flu program.
So how soon could people have access to this potentially?
Yeah, so phase 2, basically this year's phase 1, phase 2 is next year, and then 2028, that's where it depends where you live. So we're aiming to run these accelerated phase 3 trials in probably Europe.
That's the part that got people scared in the COVID-19 pandemic, that word, accelerated.
Accelerated, yeah. So if it helps, I've worked on this for 13 years, so it's not accelerated. It's been carefully developed. Flu has an accelerated path, and we've been doing it since 1940s because you have to, every flu vaccine is accelerated because you don't have that much.
It mutates?
Yeah, it mutates constantly. They announce in March, here's the new strains, and you have to have it ready by October. And so you always have to have an accelerated path every single year because you can't, if you spent 2 years to produce it or 10 years to produce a vaccine, you'd never have it ready in time for the season.
Yeah.
So when I say accelerated, I mean standard for flu. It is, we'll see where things go in 2028. It is possible that we get this thing approved in Europe and Japan before the United States.
Why is that?
The FDA has, there's been some changes on how they're evaluating things, and particularly around phase 3 trials. And there was kind of a back and forth with Moderna, where there was originally a recommendation. They were they'd done a phase 3 trial. They were asking to get review for approval. Prasad had overruled his team and said that he was going to refuse to even look at their stuff. There was a big political blowback because people want these things. And so the FDA reversed course, agreed to review, and then Prasad was fired. So, but that said, there's a little bit of turbulence at the FDA, and so as a business owner, I kind of want to understand and have a stable understanding before you invest in the very expensive phase 3 trials, what the state is at the FDA. And so if it's stabilized by then, we'll consider it, but otherwise what we'll probably do is get accelerated approval in Europe and Japan and a couple other jurisdictions first. and then maybe move a little bit more slowly with the FDA, just because it worked out for Moderna, but it almost didn't. And that was, they'd spent $200 million on a phase 3 trial, and they also did a voucher. So like it could have been a $350 million problem. And I just, as a business owner, I need to have more assurance and stability on the behavior of the regulatory authorities. And so we'll probably get this approved. It probably will be non-Americans are going to access this first, just until that is sorted out.
That was going to be my next question. As an American biotech business owner, what would you like to see the American government do better, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, America has the modern American economy. We have high tech and we have bioscience as some of the major sectors that we have, and basically white collar, knowledge driven infrastructure. And I just think that that's something we want to retain and hold on to, and because it's one of our big areas of economic benefit in the new economy. And in order for that to thrive, there's some things we want to support in the infrastructure here, so we don't have brain drain to other nations. Normally, and for decades, we've benefited with the opposite, that people...
I was going to say, people were coming here. So are we now seeing the opposite?
Well, yeah, I think it's been a period of change for the country, where I think you have scientists, there's been a lot of layoffs, and there's lack of clarity. It's harder to get scientists from overseas to come here. There's been, some differences on funding levels of grants, and some academic institutions interacting with government have caused, I would say, some instability. And so I think the thing I would ask for is stability, and it's stability of American leadership of bioscience, but also stability of regulatory at the FDA, because the pharmaceutical industry needs to have whatever the rules are, we need them to be predictable so that we can choose to make effective strategy, because it's almost better to have a harsh rule than to not know what the rule is, because you can make decisions around a harsh rule, whereas if you don't know what the rules are, then you don't even want to play the game in the first place.
Spoken like a true scientist. I need to know the variables. What am I working with?
Well, it's spoken like a poker player. I need to know what the rules of the game are before I put money in the pot, right? Like, I'm like, if a bunch of pirates are like, oh yeah, come and play, don't worry, we'll tell you the rules as you go along. I'm not gonna, no, dude, you gotta tell me the rules first. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain more about what it is you're working on, and I wish you the best.
I just want to thank you again for your outstanding reporting throughout the pandemic and up to now, and look forward to talking again in the future.